Hi everybody. As you know, I just finished a 20-year section hike of the Appalachian Trail, and the last section was the 15 or 16 miles through Baxter State Park and up to the summit of Mount Katahdin. So that's today's video. Stay tuned. The hike through Baxter State Park is unlike any other part of the Appalachian Trail. Now that may sound cliche because that can be applied to any number of sections of the trail. For example, the Presidential Range in New Hampshire, Mohoosic Notch in Maine, Grayson Highlands in Virginia, the Balds of Tennessee, North Carolina, and Southern Virginia. These are all unique parts, and Baxter State Park has its own unique characteristics. First, it's a pleasant 10-mile hike from the entrance to the park along the Appalachian Trail, which is about a mile from the A-Ball Bridge campground that I stayed at, to the Katahdin Stream campground, which is where the ranger station is. And then another 5.4 miles approximately from the campgrounds there up to Baxter Peak on Mount Katahdin. Primarily, Baxter State Park is a wildlife sanctuary. Recreation is second, so the rules are very strict. For example, no dogs are allowed. The rangers are very strict about where you can pitch your tent, for example. There is one campsite called the Birches, which is for long-distance hikers. And in order to get a reservation at the Birches, one has to have come at least 100 miles. Well, basically that means one has to do the hike that I did or more from farther south than that. And that is the only way to be able to get a reservation at the Birches. Now, this is the way the park handles the fact that they know that long-distance hikers can't make reservations way ahead of time, like many of the people who are visiting Baxter State Park and climbing Mount Katahdin, which does take a permit, and it's something they can schedule ahead of time. They understand that the long-distance Appalachian Trail hikers can't do that. The reason I think they put the 100 miles on it is a southbounder who is just going to start at the peak of Mount Katahdin. Well, they know they can actually make a reservation in the park and get a campsite in the park rather than staying at the Birches, which is, again, for more transient hikers, we'd say. There is a 12-person maximum capacity at that campsite, and they do not vary from that. They will not put a 13th person in there. And I was afraid they were going to, and I'll get to that in a little while. In order to reserve a spot at that campground, you have to sign up at 7 a.m. at the park entrance. Usually there's a ranger there, sometimes there's not. The day I went in, there was no ranger there, so what we had to do was sign the reservation sheet and take a photograph with a timestamp on it so that we could show it to the ranger to prove to the ranger that we didn't enter before 7 o'clock. Now, I think you can enter before 7 o'clock if you're not planning on staying on the Birches, but that's the rule they've set up for the Birches. When I first got there, I was actually 12th in line. Even though I got up at 4:30 in the morning at the A-Ball Bridge campground, everybody else had the same idea. So I hiked in, got to the park entrance, and found myself standing behind everybody else. It really didn't matter. As long as I was in the top 12, I was going to get a spot at the Birches, which I did. So now let's go out to the trail and take a look at that hike in from basically the entrance to the park to the campground. These are rapids, I guess we call them. I guess this is still the Penobscot River, or maybe it's Katahdin Stream at this point. It may be Katahdin Stream. I know the trail falls along Katahdin Stream. But wow, the amount of water flowing through Maine is just amazing. This is Little Niagara Falls. I did not go down below to see it where it goes over the edge. Well, I'm sitting here under the bridge at Katahdin Stream, soaking my feet. I'm going to try doing it for 20 minutes. This is a very cold stream. Tomorrow, I climb up Mount Katahdin. If all goes well, I'll have completed my Appalachian Trail section hike. Well, I'm sitting here at the Birches in the shelter, one of the two shelters. This campsite is in Baxter State Park, and it is for northbound long distance hikers only. Literally, southbound long distance hikers can't do it unless, like one guy here did, went through the 100-mile wilderness, basically the same hike that I did. And then after he summits Katahdin, and then he's going to go back down to Monson, Maine, and start hiking southward. The limit is 12 people at the site. There are 2 4-person shelters, and there's room for tents, but they're very, very strict on where you can pitch the tents. Basically, it's either got to be on the pad or at a spot where you could reach out from the tent and touch a man-made structure. That was the rule that the ranger gave us, and he says if it doesn't meet those rules, he will make you take the tent down. Everybody here seems to have met that rule. The other shelter's got a group of 4 people in it, and there are 5 tents that meet the criteria that have been pitched. I was the last one in, so I was actually the second to the last one in, but I didn't really feel like pitching my tent so close to all the others. As it turned out, with those 5 tents, 2 of them are couples. Well, that's 7 people, plus 4 in the other shelter is 11, and I'm the 12th person. So I figured I was going to get hosed. I was going to end up in a cramped shelter. Well, I'm actually in a shelter by myself. And despite the fact that there's 3 open spots in this shelter, they will not assign anybody else. There's a person number 13, I met him. He was assigned something else. I mean, he was given a site. The point is, they restricted the occupancy. It's not that how many people they can cram in. There's only going to be 12. So that means I've got this whole shelter to myself today, just by luck. This is a bear cable. See when swinging there, I set it in motion just so you can pick it up on the camera. A bear cable, you basically clip your food bag to that carabiner, and then on a pulley, and it pulls up to there. So there's mine. Down here is where it clips to the tree. So my schedule was to stay at the Birches and then just spend the day enjoying the hike up Mount Katahdin. The ranger came around, gave us advice, told us about how much water to bring, where we would have water supplies. He had suggested 3 liters, so I went with 4 liters. He suggested a turnaround time of, I think, 1 o'clock, he said. So I made my turnaround time being noon because you climb up to the peak, but you've got to turn around and come back down. I had to meet a shuttle between 4 and 4:30, so I had to make sure that I could get back in time. Fortunately, as we'll see, I got there in plenty of time. So the climb up Mount Katahdin, in order to give it some context, I have what I call a difficulty index, which I use when I'm hiking. And it's a simple formula. It's simply the total feet of ascent divided by the miles over which we're doing that ascent. Now, this is not net change in elevation. It doesn't include any descents. It's just actual ascending that I'll do. How many feet of ascending am I going to do over a certain distance? And that gives me the difficulty index. So here's the scale that I have. If the difficulty index is 0, it's a walk in the park. 200 is still pretty easy. At 400, at least when I'm acclimated to hiking, 400, I'm still very comfortable. If it's at 400, I can probably make 20 miles knowing that it's 400. In other words, 8,000 feet of ascending over 20 miles is pretty comfortable for me, at least once I've been out there for a while. Once you start getting into numbers like 600, that gets to be challenging, at least if it's over any great distance. 800 is very difficult. 1,000 is extreme. And something happens once you get over 1,000. You're no longer really hiking, you're climbing. So there's a qualitative difference when the index gets that high. And that's important because at that point, all bets are off. You're not going to worry about how many miles you're going to make. You're just going to kind of enjoy the experience. It is a different activity, so to speak, that they throw at you at the northernmost end of the trail. So let's look at the elevation profile of the climb up Mount Katahdin. This is exaggerated a little, but it's from the far out application that I use, and that gives me how many feet of ascent that I have to do. So the steep part of the climb starts around Katahdin Stream Falls, which is not the Katahdin Stream campground. That's a little bit lower down on the mountain, but the Katahdin Stream Falls up to what I just call the crest. It's when you kind of get out of the climby, very steep part, but you can see the whole ridge ahead of you, and you see how much farther you have to do if you know how to spot the right peak that you're headed to. So this is the part that is the concern, this section of trail. So for comparison, let's just look at some various other places along the trail where a difficulty index over a short period comes into play. First, from the Baxter State Park entrance to the Katahdin Stream campground, which is where the ranger station is and which is where you get briefed and where you sign up for the Birches campsite, it's 90 feet per mile for 10 miles. That is barely noticeable. If it were just a steady 90 feet per mile, it would be totally unnoticeable. The reality of the terrain is that there are some sections where there's no ascents at all, and there are other sections where it's a little bit more than 90 feet in a mile. But on average, over 10 miles, it's 90 feet per mile, which is easy. Clingman's Dome in Tennessee is actually the highest point on the entire Appalachian Trail. And I went up that last year, and I camped out at the base of the final climb up to Clingman's Dome. And I had been worried about it the whole time I was approaching it. But I discovered it was only around a 400 index, coming from the south as I was, for a little under 3 miles. Very comfortable, very easy hike as it turned out to be. If I were coming from the north, it's a little more challenging. The index is 546 for a much shorter distance, so it is a bit of a climb coming from the other direction. The Priest, which is one of 3 hills in Virginia that make up what they call the Triple Crown. One of the others is Dragon's Tooth. I don't know what the third one is. I don't remember what it was. But that's going beyond challenging and getting towards difficult at a 677 index. Mount Washington in New Hampshire from the Lake of the Clouds hut is closer to 900 for 1.4 miles, so it's not that far. Kind of ranks as difficult. I actually was in pretty good shape when I went over it, and I didn't have much trouble getting up Mount Washington. I was surprised at how quickly I got up there. Finally, just for comparison, for anybody who has climbed Mount Monadnock, the steepest trail that I could find information on was the Red Spot Trail. This is not part of the Appalachian Trail, but its index was 1,233, but only for 0.6 miles. So in other words, it was something like 800 feet over 0.6 miles gives you 1,233 feet per mile. So that is a very steep climb, but it's very short. Mount Katahdin, using the Appalachian Trail or the Hunt Trail, the two are concurrent there, from the Katahdin Stream Falls that I showed you earlier with the green circle, up to the crest, the red circle, was almost as much as Mount Monadnock, except for 4 times as long. So imagine that, going up the steepest part of Mount Monadnock, but having to go up the steep part 4 times in a row with a slack pack. I didn't have a full pack. Some people have to do it in a full pack because they're not going down by the same way that they came up. But this was a slack pack. I had just water with me, a small bit of food, raincoat, and my water filter first aid kit, stuff like that. It was a very light pack, probably around 10 pounds at the most. So that's the difficulty of this. Again, we're beyond hiking and we're actually climbing when it comes to going up Katahdin. So again, let's go out to the trail and see what that was like. Making the last 5 miles, I've come 2,100 and however, 2,189, I guess, or 92. I don't know what the official length is anymore. It changes every year because there are minor reroutings. Thanks, Darlene, for encouraging me all these years and letting me go. Katahdin Stream Falls. Okay, I've been climbing for 2 hours. Just got above tree line. Time to stop for a snack. But this is the view of Maine. Look at all that. I don't know, I just can't name the peaks. It's just astounding. But you look for miles and miles. I don't know what those things are over there. Lakes everywhere. Just amazing. According to the application on my phone, I'm a little bit more than halfway up. I don't know if you can see it on here, but there's a rung up there. That's part of the trail. I gotta climb up there. Still got a lot of the steep part to go. And then it actually gets a little less steep for a while. Then a final push to the top. Can't believe I'm higher than that. I was looking at it earlier. This is like Mount Monadnock on steroids. I stowed my trekking poles. They started to become a liability, as Craig would put it, after a while on certain climbs. And so basically gone 2,000 miles with my trekking poles. I feel like I'm walking, hiking with 2 fewer limbs than I usually have, but they were just getting in the way, at least for this climb. I believe the climb goes up to there, and at the top of that it levels out a little, then goes over to there. And I think that could be a different peak, but anyways, I think I gotta go up there. It looks like the markers are putting me up there, so I'm still on the steep part. It's fun. It's a rock climb. And to be honest, I didn't even get out of breath until just now, really, from a very steep rocky part. Of course, all the thru hikers, they're already probably at the top already. But, you know, this is, you know, I got to go at my speed, which is much slower. But I have a turnaround time of around noon. Well, it's only 8:43. So I think I've done good here. I think I'll be able to get to the top. You know, famous last words. Last time I said something like that, and that's when I slipped and dislocated a shoulder. So let's just be careful. Somehow, as steep as it is, when you're above tree line, it seems more fun than challenge. If I were in the trees, I'd be really wigged out about going up this. It's the last part of the steep part. I'm actually more afraid of coming down this than I am going up. Okay, I just finished the very steep part. I still got a ways to go. You can see what I still got to climb to get to Baxter Peak at the top. This is the part where it's just going to slowly rise for a while. My poles are still stowed. I'm not going to unstow them. But this is the beautiful part of hiking Maine. When you get up, not just above tree line, but into the very fragile ecosystem. There's a sign back there saying, please stay on the trail, because these things get damaged easily by footsteps. This is what it looks like to be most of the way up Katahdin. And somehow I missed the trail. I wandered off it, which is exactly what they told me not to do. Well, yeah, it was at least on hard surface. And that's what counts. They're very strict here. Even at the Birch's campsite, where you could pitch your tent, had to be on solid surfaces, and the rangers were very strict and would make you move the tent if it wasn't within the proper limits. But here we go, panoramic view in 3 directions anyway. Oops, a little high there. Panoramic view in 3 directions. Ooh boy, look at that. All these peaks. Here's an interesting surprise. I thought I was headed for that peak over there. That seems to be higher. But all of a sudden, I'm coming up here and I see the famous sign, and I see everybody getting their pictures taken. So holy cow, I'm about 100 yards from finishing this. I thought I had about a half mile to go. Gotta send a message to Mike. Well, of course, to Darlene first, but then to Mike, let him know that I got up here in less than 4.5 hours. So that's pretty good. I gave myself a turn back time of noon, and it's only 10:15. So that has worked out well. According to a couple hikers I just talked to, the ranger had mentioned this. That peak over there looking higher than here, they say is an optical illusion. It is not higher than here. So, well, I'm going to go up to the cairn there so I can at least say I did get to the top. Though, technically, I guess that the sign is the terminus of the trail. I don't know. Go up and touch the cairn. And this was a challenge. It was fun. It was not as hard as I thought. This here, I think, is the knife edge. That is a trail that I used to think I would want to go on. I do not. I don't know if you can see it on this video, but that is a dangerous, crazy trail. It goes along there. Well, I'm on my way back down. I guess what I'm looking at here, I'm confused now. Which peak is which? I guess that one on the right is the one that only looks, because the angles looks like it's higher, but it's not. But coming down Katahdin, incredibly steep everywhere. Off to the side, I'll be starting the steep climb soon. That's going to be a joy. That's probably going to take me just as long to get down as it took me to get up that part. Gotta watch your footing and everything. And I guess
I don't know where it goes down. I can see the trail though, indentation in the woods over there. Probably not picked up on the camera, but boy, it's almost like you go through all the trouble to get up here and you hate to get down, but you know, like the ranger said, your turnaround time should be 1 o'clock, which to me means leave the summit by 1 o'clock. Well, me being a little conservative, if the ranger said turnaround time at 1, I set my turnaround time for noon. In other words, if I hadn't been up there by noon, it was time to turn around. I wasn't going to be able to make it and get back, because the time back to get my ride, I would have missed the ride. But I got up there around 10:15, so I beat my turnaround time by about 2 hours. So I'm a lot stronger than I had thought, and I was being overly cautious. And then I left the peak around 11, I guess. I don't know, maybe a little later than 11. I'll be able to tell from the Garmin records when I get home. And now I'm just, you know, enjoying being above the tree line, which is always just a pleasant experience, as long as you remember to put on SPF 100. There's a little redhead girl with fair skin. She was with her uncles hiking and had lost track of them because one of them was having trouble, so the other one went back and she went on ahead. I mean, she was not like a teenager. She was probably early 20s. I mean, maybe late teens. But she saw me putting on the sunblock and asked for some. I joked with Darlene and said, quickest 20 bucks I ever made. But of course I let her take it because I've been through it. So absolutely. I told her, sure, take it. Take some SPF 100 and put it on you. Because I was putting on my second application. I'm not going to make that mistake again. I'm not above tree line for as long as I was on the presidential range, but it's still several hours. So there it is. Last look at Katahdin. At least that peak of Katahdin. There's a lot of peaks here. A lot of different ones. I don't know how many trails go up to. The knife edge looked very dangerous. I won't be ever taking that in my lifetime. A lot of lakes out here. It's beautiful. This is, in general, where I am right now, is the most dangerous part of this entire hike. The climb down off Katahdin. It's like climbing down off Chairback, except, you know, 10 times as long. I don't know. A lot longer. I got to be very careful because going downhill, you know, if you're going uphill, if you slide, you can catch yourself. If you're going down rocks like this, if you start to fall forward, you're screwed. It's like, you know, you probably, I wouldn't even be able to call an SOS. I'd probably be so broken and battered. So, gotta be careful here. It is easier to follow the marks though, because on the way up, I couldn't see half of them. Here, I can see several of them ahead. After I get over this section and then it levels out for a while, then I guess there's one more little steep part. It's not quite so bad. So all I have to do is get down to that little section that you can see right ahead, and that's most of the, well, I think it's dangerous after that going down, but most of it is right here. Once again, a look at what I just came down. It's very steep. That's why the climb down is so dangerous. It's more dangerous than the climb up. It's a little easier because you're not fighting against gravity, but it's more dangerous. Here's where the trail goes from.
So that was my final section of the Appalachian Trail. It was a pretty amazing experience that I've been waiting for actually since my mid-40s, when it first occurred to me that maybe I could do the whole trail. One thing I want to address, there seems to be a myth that through hikers look down upon section hikers, and I want to dispel that. I was at the Birches with 11 through hikers my last night on the trail, my last overnight on the trail, and all of them, without exception, was incredibly supportive of my efforts, and they were actually amazed that what they considered admirable resolve on my part to stick with this for 20 years and keep on going back. the logistics of them just baffled them, because for them the logistics was get on a trail in Georgia, get off the trail in Maine. They did once each. Whereas I had to do it every year for 20 years. And in some years, I went out to the trail more than once to fill in different sections. So I did this more than 20 times. So I think in all my years of hiking, I've only run into one group of thru hikers that were really a bunch of jerks. I've told about that story before. They were first-class jerks, but they were the exception. So I could give thanks to the thru hikers, especially Bird, who was a guy I met at the end of the 100-mile wilderness. He's a triple crowner, which means he has done the Pacific Crest Trail, the Continental Divide Trail. Those are both longer than the Appalachian Trail. The Pacific Crest Trail is 2,600 miles. The Continental Divide Trail was like 3,000 miles. And he was, by finishing a thru hike of the Appalachian Trail, had finally earned his Triple Crown, something that I'll probably never have a chance to do, just given my age and given that thru hiking is probably not something that I'll be able to do just because of social obligations. Anyways, I do want to thank them and give them a shout out for their encouragement that they gave me as I prepared for this last climb. Now in the next video, I'll have a photo montage of the 20 years of hiking. I wasn't always taking videos for most of these years, but at least you'll be able to see me age before your very eyes. I look forward to seeing you then. Thanks for watching.